Okay, welcome back to week 10, part 2. The Six Dynasties period. The prelude to the Six Dynasties period was a tumultuous time. At the end of the Han Dynasty, three separate and warring kingdoms ruled China from 265 to 587 CE. And one of several invasions of the Mongols helped to provide some of the chaos of the time. In general, the Six Dynasties period is regarded as a very chaotic one. But it was not without art forms such as painting, sculpture, and poetry. In fact, you can read about the complex aesthetics of the time, including the application of Taoist concepts of qi in painting on page 342. The Six Dynasties period is also regarded by scholars as a time when a distinction began to be solidified between northern and southern China. In general, Confucianism was falling out of favor anyway, which made sense if you think about how Confucianism relies on respect for those in power. This is a time when the powerful are sometimes seen as corrupt and power is easily transferred or stolen. So, power and Confucianism, not quite so respect-worthy anymore. But still, Confucianism remained the official doctrine in the North. Hand scrolls often reflect such trends. Hand scrolls are scrolls of paper or silk that could be read like books from right to left in a horizontal fashion. So you can see an illustration of a hand scroll on the screen. Here is what a hand scroll might look like closed for storage. Here is what a hand scroll looks like rolled out. Here's the beginning, and then the rest of it is rolled up, and then you unroll it and roll it as you go in order to read from right to left. And here you can see a photo of a closed roll, which you can see is back to a silk. The admonitions, of the imperial instructus to court ladies is a collection of stories intended to instruct the women of the court in proper Confucian wifely behavior. A very, very important hand scroll. The section that you're seeing on the screen shows a Han-era queen's bravery in putting herself between danger and her husband. The scroll also demonstrates how artists utilize multiple images of the same figure, such as Lady Feng, in order to clarify a narrative. Hand scrolls are typically rather short in height. Admonitions is shorter than a sheet of notebook paper, shorter this way. So they could easily be read by one or two people. Their length, however, was often in feet. Admonitions is actually over 11 feet long. Another but less popular book format is the album, which is very much like the Western style codex book. Here's an album leaf you can see on the screen. The red marks on the page are stamps or seals belonging to a variety of important collectors and other individuals who literally stamp the piece with their seal of approval. This popular practice continues later in in Korea and Japan. In the more rebellious South, in a trend fueled by the intellectual class known as the literati or Wen-Ren, they gravitated more towards Taoism. Taoism, you'll recall, advocated on the one hand a withdrawal from society and also an attitude of non-impact or non-action towards nature. The Wen-Ren literati class, who were often government employees, were educated but of generally a pretty average class birth. They could have well afforded to live the hermit lifestyle not readily available to the peasant class. Nevertheless, the Wen-Ren, we'll see, are a philosophical group who drive trends in art and poetry, as well as spirituality. Once it had been banned in the Han Dynasty, Buddhism again became popular at all levels in the Sixth Dynasty period. As it did in India, Buddhism served as an alternative to the hierarchical Confucianism and what some saw as its co-conspirator, Taoism. Since it was occasionally considered to be subversive, Buddhists endured periods of persecution in the north during the Sixth Dynasties period. But by the latter half of the 6th century, monastic Buddhism is well established throughout northern and southern China. As they did in India, monks in China often use natural or human-made caves for the purpose of meditation or residence. The Yungan Caves area, known as the grottos, housed the colossal Buddha that you see on the screen. The enormous sculptures were once encased within the rock of the cave, but the exterior wall grew weak and fell away. The colossal Buddha is relatively rare anywhere, let alone China, but it has its precedence. The proximity of Yungang to the Silk Road is not lost on scholars who reasonably assume that the Chinese sculptors had seen or heard of the Bamiyan Buddhas of Afghanistan, which were created around the same time. The Chinese version of Buddha is easily recognizable to us, as he bears the lakshanas, or physical markings or traits of the Buddha. We recognize the Ushnisha, the Sangati, the earlobes, and his lotus position in the mudras, where his hands once were. The physical comportment of the Buddha is a little more alert, less relaxed and fleshy perhaps than our Indian examples from last week. The Sui dynasty begins with the Buddhist emperor, and so it's the Tang dynasty, and in the Tang dynasty yield many Buddhist objects and structures. The trend toward Buddhism led to the multiplicity of practice, which we now know had already early on divided in Nepal and India into Theravada and Mahayana or Hinayana Buddhism. One sect of the Mahayana Buddhism favored a Buddha called the Amitabha Buddha, which you can see in a Sui example on the screen. The Amitabha Buddha dwelled in the Pure Land, a Western paradise which an adherent could achieve by chanting a mantra, a repetitive chant that was meant to aid in meditation. The altar sculpture of Amitabha on the screen shows him accompanied by teachers and bodhisattvas, including Guan Yin. Guan Yin is a bodhisattva who is highly popular in China, and it is the Chinese form of Avalokiteshvara, the Buddhist bodhisattva of greatest compassion. Amitabha sits in an ornately abstracted, lush setting meant to evoke the Western paradise. The Western paradise is also depicted in the cave painting from the Tang dynasty on the screen. This painting is one of many cave systems along the Silk Road used by Buddhists. Amitabha is seated in the center, surrounded by the teachers and bodhisattvas who spread the word. The Western paradise here is imagined as a courtly or palace setting with architecture and entertainment, rather than a place of lush greenery, as in the altar sculpture. Perhaps because, unlike other forms of Buddhism, Pure Land Buddhism promises the possibility of immediate reward instead of waiting several lifetimes, it became the most popular form of Buddhism in China and Japan for some time. There aren't many temples that survive the Tang dynasty, but a few that do fill in the gaps between the watchtower models of the Han dynasty and the later pagoda-style structures. The Nanchun-Si temple here is redundant because Si is a suffix that means temple, is the oldest known wooden structure to have survived intact from China. The temple is one level, but displays the characteristic eave or overhang of Chinese and later Japanese culture. The roof of the Nanchun-Si is hipped rather than a regular A-frame, so rather than it coming down in a straight line from the ridgepole to the edge of the eaves, the roof starts to bow outwards, like this, in a curve, the way hips extend outward below one's waist. The hipped roof is one highly recognizable characteristic of Chinese architecture. But though it's difficult to see, the Nanchun-Si is also a great example of another architectural Chinese characteristic, the dugong bracket. The dugong bracket are more easily seen in the Fugan-Si temple. You can see them here, and you can see them here as well. Dugong is a system of interlocking wooden pieces that form brackets which hold up the hipped roofs and eaves of traditional Chinese buildings. The dugong here are spectacularly complex. The du and gong are the two parts of the bracket which fit together neatly but not too perfectly. Dugong systems are meant to be able to move and sway with tremors, winds, and other elements of nature. Their flexibility allowed for wooden structures to better withstand the elements without just falling over. The dugong bracketwork can also be, as you see, highly decorative, and their use as decorative elements continues today in traditional style architecture of China and Japan. The Great Wild Goose Pagoda at Xi'an Temple in Chang'an was built in a celebration of the return of a great Chinese Buddhist leader. The pagoda, which we've referred to before, has finally now been realized. The word pagoda is a Portuguese term that's come to be associated with a structure in East Asia, and the pagoda has multiple overhanging eaves marking each level of a tower-like building. The pagoda type has its origins in the Indian stupa, which we can see here. And in this illustration, you can see how the stupa kind of moves to the later stupa, watchtower, eventually getting mixed up with the watchtower idea into the pagoda. The Great Wild Goose Pagoda clearly has an axis mundi. Right. Scholars theorize that the shifting shape of the stupa in India to the more bell and tower-like shapes of the temple in Southeast Asia gave rise to the idea of the temple as a vertically oriented structure. So see here, it's more horizontal or more sort of round, and then it starts to become taller over time. The modified stupa merged with the highly Chinese style of watchtower or model house structure with its even overhangs, and then there you have the Great Wild Goose Pagoda. Now, the Great Wild Goose Pagoda is made of stone, so there's no dugong brackets. There's no need for them. The overhangs and eaves are also very simplified and very clean lined. But still, the Great Wild Goose Pagoda establishes the pagoda type structure in China. After a short period of deunification in the Tang Dynasty, the Chinese states are once again unified under the Song Dynasty. Like the Han Dynasty, the Song Dynasty is divided into two, the Northern Song and the Southern Song. The interruption was caused by the invasion of the Manchu from the north in 1126. The Song rulers fled south and reestablished rule there. Despite this upset, the Song Dynasty is regarded actually as a time of prosperity and wealth for China, although, perhaps because of, its imperial aspirations were diminishing. As your book points out, patronage of the arts flourished at the court level, but also at the level of the middle class. Interest in Buddhism continued to flourish, and the Bodhisattva Guanyin was as popular as ever. Two versions of joined wood construction statues of Guanyin appear. Both are polychromed, but the example on the screen from the Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City is more colorful, and the setting and clothing more elaborate than this second example from the Honolulu Academy of Art. Both Guanyin statues present the Bodhisattva in a pose of royal ease, similar to the Tribhanga pose we saw in Indian images of Avalokiteshvara. But both are more alert and upright than their Indian counterparts. They are at rest, but at the ready. The Chinese interpretation of the comportment of the Buddha or Bodhisattva is innovative and distinctive. Both statues may also reveal some of the androgynous influence of India. In fact, Guanyin is believed by some to be both male and female, as we saw with Shiva. Over time, the originally male Guanyin transformed into a female. And if you ask a Chinese adherent today, he or she would probably say that the original male Guanyin is actually now considered a female. Joined wood sculptures, where sculptures are carved of several pieces of wood glued together, are important during this era. But the Song dynasties are best known for scroll painting and ink on silk. Shimo, or ink painting, was definitely also a courtly activity, but the best examples come from the Wenren literati class of the Northern and Southern Song dynasties. Wenren artists occupy a very interesting place in art history. The literati or Wenren class of artists in China made artwork for their friends and colleagues rather than for sale. This is a trend that we just do not see in other areas of the world before now. The idea that an artist could make art for reasons other than the purpose of serving religion or rulership is a rare one in the world at this time. The Song dynasty artists, North and South, looked to the world of philosophy for inspiration and instruction. Some subscribed to Neo-Confucianism, a new interpretation of the practice which synthesized with Taoism and Buddhism. Chan Buddhism, too, influenced by Song dynasty painters. Chan Buddhists tried to come closer in their practice to the original form of Buddhism, as practiced by the Buddha. All these spiritual and philosophical influences had surprisingly similar and at the same time pluralistic results. Song dynasty artists might paint on hand scrolls meant to be read by individuals or two people. Like here, this is a hand scroll. Or they might be painted on hanging scrolls, meant to be unrolled for displaying the entire thing at once, like here in Travelers Among Mountains and Streams. Shimo artists often painted such subjects as nature and landscape, but in highly stylized and abstracted ways. The Fan Quan hanging scroll is a great illustration of the abstraction taking place in imagery, specifically mountains and rock formations, which were indicated with artistic and expressive brushstrokes rather than careful and realistic ones. Franquan's Travelers is typically Neo-Confucian message, heavily influenced by Taoism of the proper relationship between humans and nature. The landscape is large and gorgeous, while the people within are barely perceptible. In fact, you can just barely see them down here. In this piece, Huineng chopping bamboo at the moment of enlightenment displays these same aesthetic qualities, but also presents us, as good Buddhist art always does, with a model that Buddhists can follow and learn from. Here, a famous Buddhist teacher is depicted doing a very mundane activity, which Chan Buddhist argues were good opportunities for enlightenment to come to you. Doing simple activities that don't require thought are considered to be great avenues for meditation. Lan Kai's painting provides a model, but also an opportunity for the artist, who no doubt was expected to use his painting as a meditation-enhancing activity. Well, we end at the year 1279 CE and the end of the Sung dynasty. In 1279, another invasion from the north by the Mongol leader Kublai Khan marks the end of the era. The Mongols largely adopted Chinese culture, which continued to develop relatively separately in the north and south. Well, that wraps up week 10 on China. Please be sure to read the section on Korea in your textbook, as you will be responsible for it. Next week, we will journey to Japan with week 11. Thanks.